Hello everybody and welcome to a very special week here at JayEmm on Cars. And it's special for two reasons really. Number one, this week I'm going to be reviewing 3 Ferrari V12s. In fact, you could almost look at them as 3 in a row because I'm doing the 550, the 599 and the F12. Yes, I know that there was the 575 in there, but let's just pretend that's 550 Mark II, shall we? And it's going to be a good week, and I know it's going to be a good week because I'm actually recording this one last. And this one is perhaps the most special of all of the reviews this week because, you see, we're starting this week in my Ferrari 550 Maranello. Still can't quite grasp that concept that I don't have to give this car back to someone when I'm done with it. It's just going to sit on my driveway and look very, very pretty. I apologise for the fact that in some of the shots it's not as clean as it could be. I've actually already booked it in for a proper going over and indeed a full paint correction, so it's going to look its absolute best, but that's not happening for a little while. So why did I buy a 550? Well, many reasons, in fact so many that is going to be a different video. Today is about the experience. And what's a 550 like? Well, it's rather good. I'm very lucky in that I've actually got some decent experience of the 550's contemporaries, including its Maranello stablemates, the 456 and the 355. A lot of people forget, but the 456 was actually the more expensive car when it was new, by quite a margin too. Now the 550 is a fairly rare car, even by modern Ferrari standards. You see, in total they made 3,083 of these. If you want to include the Barchetta in that figure, you're talking about something like 3,500. That's worldwide. If you've ever looked at a 550 advert on Auto Trader, Piston Heads or anywhere like that, you'll probably see people quoting 457 as the number of UK cars made. I think you're probably going to find there's about 400 to 450 of these really remaining in the UK. It's very hard to actually get an exact number because, you see, when Ferrari registered these, they didn't actually really register them properly. You see, on the V5 it doesn't say Ferrari 550 or anything like that, it just sort of says Ferrari. And that means researching this wasn't very easy. In fact, the only decent modern review out there, other than I hope this one, I think, is the one from Harry Metcalf. I did see Doug DeMuro's video on the 550 and I've got a few things I don't agree with Doug on, but that is going to be its own video. The 550 I find in many ways is a criminally underappreciated car. Now, sure, you could look at the prices of them and go, well, they're not underappreciated at all. But people tend to talk about the 355s and the 360s as the cars they sort of lust after. Perhaps because they're the more obvious supercar types. They're the mid-engine V8 screaming high revving cars. And yeah, I totally get that. I still massively want a 355. Absolutely love them. But there are a lot of things that the 550 just does better. You got to remember, this was something like 50% more expensive than a 355. So what do you get for your 50% more money? Well, you get 50% more cylinders, of course, 5.5 litres of pure Ferrari V12 up the front, and this is a very special engine no matter how you measure it. Now, by modern standards, it's perhaps a little bit basic, having not even any variable valve timing, but it has forged pistons, a titanium alloy con rods, a dry sump, and a red line of about 7,600 RPM. And that means it produces a fairly healthy 485 horses and about 420 pound-foot of torque. Now again, those figures may not seem brilliant by modern standards, and when combined with the weight figure of about 1,700 kilos, you'd think the performance would simply be decent. And in many ways, it certainly is. What's amazing about this car, though, is the fact that it is so obscenely flexible. You might think with it lacking that variable valve timing that it wouldn't have a lot of torque load down. But what it does have instead is a very trick variable length intake setup. You see, there's a couple of different paths that the air can take before it gets into those cylinders, and that makes it quite efficient. Ferrari is still playing around with technology like that, even in something like the F12, and it gives them a healthy amount more mid-range versus their competition. Ferrari are all about the engines, but with the 550, I feel like it was that one day when everybody who knew how to do their job well turned up, and all of the people that would ruin things normally forgot to come into the office. It is really absolutely sublime. I struggle to think of things wrong with it. Don't worry, there are some things wrong with it. This is not a car without fault, oh no. But also, it's just so much better than I thought it might be. So that engine, very good, and it's also got a voice of its own. I'm not sure yet whether I want to put an exhaust on it or not. My initial plans were definitely to go and do that, and that was going to be one of the first things I wanted to do, but actually, I'm going to spend a bit more time in it. The suspension is brilliant. It is of course still a relatively firm riding car, but it's also much more supple than you might expect. If you've never driven a Ferrari before, it would probably surprise you. It has a sport button which will adjust the dampers. Very trick technology, I suppose, in 1996, although as somebody has pointed out to me before, Mitsubishi got there long before Ferrari did, but still, it's very impressive and it works well. You can actually benefit in certain situations from sport mode, but on my favourite roads, normal does just fine. It's perhaps the steering feel, which is the big surprise for me. You see, so often that is a Ferrari's Achilles heel. In fact, even in the 355, a car which very, very few people seem willing to criticise, the steering's just not great. That was one of their first attempts at power steering and they simply didn't get it right. It's too light, there's no real feel through it, no feedback, and that makes it trickier than it really should be. But in the 550, they got it right. Now at low speeds it's relatively light, but it has a servotronic system, so the assistance varies depending on speed, and when you get over about 40 or so, it really weightens up and it becomes something else quite different. Over the 355, this car also has a spectacular view out the front. The 355's alright, but there's nothing of the car to see. Now you feel a lot lower in a 355. It does feel more genuine supercar. You feel like you're scraping along the ground, which in this car you don't. And maybe that's partly down to the fact that my seat adjustment is kind of broken a bit, but you're never going to sit down on the tarmac in this like you would in a 355 or a 360. Anyway, let's take a break for a moment. The way this car attacks these roads is staggering, absolutely staggering. I don't know how Ferrari managed to make a 1.7 ton front engine V12 car this much fun to hoon down a B road. Now you got to be careful, you got to be respectful. This is a car which was always known for having a slightly waggy tail. Now modern rubber will have certainly curbed its appetite for oversteer somewhat, but it's still a car that you have to massively respect. But even from say about 3,000 RPM, there's plenty of pull. Yeah, sure, not turbocharged shove, but it's adequate. You never feel lacking for performance in this car. All right, let's take a couple of bad things, shall we? Well, the aircon's an interesting one because you have 4 settings for the fan. The first 2 do nothing. The third does a little bit, and the fourth is essentially a small tornado that only just about keeps you cool. I am very warm in this car. There's hot air constantly rushing over you from that engine bay, which in all fairness, I am willing to forgive because it is the prettiest engine bay there pretty much ever has been, and almost certainly ever will be. An obvious car to compare this with might be an Aston Martin, and that was one of the cars that I thought about buying instead of this, something like a V12 Vantage. Well, you see, the view out from this couldn't be any more different to that in the Aston. In an Aston Martin, you feel like you're sat down in a bathtub. You feel very cocooned, much like you do in, say, I know it's going to sound a bit strange, like a Chevrolet Camaro. And I say that because I drove one of those recently too. You know, windows are all up here and you're sort of you're peering over the top of the car like that. In this, not at all. The amount of glass in this cockpit is obscene. The A, B and C pillars are paper thin, as they often were in cars this age, and that means the visibility is absolutely superb. You can place this car with real ease, and it's nowhere near as daunting, I can tell you, as the 599 or the F12. You can also enjoy it for that much longer than the F12 or the 599 by simple fact of it having not as much power. Now, of course, for some people they'll say, well, we just want more power, fine. And yeah, sure, if you do, that's great. And the 599 offers spectacular value when compared with a 550. One of the reasons the 550 is so sought after is right here. The manual gearbox. Oh, and it makes the noises. Honestly, that noise is perhaps more important to me than the one coming out the back. So what's the famous gated Ferrari shifter really like? Well, it will come as no surprise to anybody who's actually driven a Ferrari with one before to find out that it's not perfect. This one's got a personality. When it's cold, it's not on your side, not at all. But like many things Italian, it will eventually switch sides and start to cooperate. Now in this particular car, reverse can be tricky to engage, especially when it's hot, and I think that's simply an adjustment. Once everything is all warmed through, it's actually very nice to use. First to second, when the car's cold, it's a very typical Ferrari thing, don't rush it, probably double D-clutch, because second just won't be home until it's really warm, and do not force it. The car will not appreciate that. But once it's up to temp like it is now, it's actually a very nice box. It's not the fastest, no way, in comparison to say something like my S2000, which is a really quick shift. This isn't, but it does give you that sense that you're in control of something really rather powerful and quite special. You can also heel and toe, which I do a lot, just because I like doing it, really no other reason. And up to fifth, because I like going fourth to fifth because you get the clack. It's so good. I love it. Oh, and here's one of the great things, the truly great things about the 550. I'm now doing 40 miles an hour, and there's a car up ahead doing not much more. And I'm backed off, and I'm really, really loving life in here. Gives you a moment to appreciate the interior, which I haven't spoke about yet, so now's as good a time as any to do that. I love it. I absolutely love it. In nearly any review of any car that I've ever done, I'll probably comment on the general lack of leather. Well, today, I can't do that, you see, because we have leather steering wheel, leather seats, leather door cards, leather A-pillars, leather sun visor, leather roof lining, and you've even got amazing little leather straps in the back for your luggage, which are very practical. You see, if you didn't see the reveal video for this car, you won't know that I've actually already taken this car on track. I'm on a mission to not be your typical Ferrari owner. I really, really want to drive, use, and enjoy this car. And so have the previous owners, because they put 94,500 miles on the clock. Now, in fairness, I've done about 1,000 of those miles, and they have been very, very enjoyable. The car does have a thirst, and it's reminding me of that thirst now. So I'm going to turn around in a second and start heading towards the local Shell. What is the actual fuel economy? It's not good. It's really not good. Probably on a run, if I'm taking care, about 18 to the gallon. And that's Imperial. So if you're watching from America, it's even worse than that. But let's be honest here. Did you really expect a 20-odd-year-old V12 Ferrari to be good on fuel? Because I certainly did not. What I expected it to be was good looking, good sounding, special feeling, and fun. And it's all of those things in absolute spades. There's a lot of other quirks about it, a lot of other quirks. These seats are pretty small. If you're a tall chap or you're broad, they're just not going to work for you at all. The 599 seats are leagues better in comparison. They truly are. The 550 is a car of very odd proportions. One of the reasons it's so agile and so darty is no doubt going to be that wheelbase. You see, it's only 2.5 meters long. To put that into some context, that's barely any longer than a S2000 and shorter than a Nissan 370Z, which is already 4 inches shorter than a 350Z. The boot space is actually pretty usable and better than it first looks. The opening isn't the biggest, but then you realise that the space goes to each extreme of the car, and there's some bonus storage space under the boot floor too, where you'll find the toolkit and so on and so forth. There's a couple of reasons that I wanted a 550 over a 575. First off, nearly everybody seems to agree that the 575 was something of a step back in terms of handling and everything else. Sure, the engine is supposed to be a little bit better and the car is overall a bit faster, but that doesn't really bother me. I was not buying this car for the speed, and this is already potent enough. I bought it for its looks, and I prefer the looks of the 550 over the 575. You might be thinking, well, aren't they exactly the same? Well, no, not quite. The 550 has a wider mouth at the front and some other very small, subtly different styling cues, but I prefer this one. I also prefer the interior with this real classic dial setup. Again, the 575 sits in an awkward place of trying to be a little bit modern and really failing. It was okay by the standards of the day, but I want the classic feeling Ferrari. A 355 is the thing that I've always held in the highest of regard, and this is not a 355, but it has so many other things that make that car special. Plenty of gauges, for example. We've got a clock which works, a fuel gauge which sadly works, even though you hope it's actually woefully misreporting, and you've got both oil and water temperature and oil pressure. You should keep an eye on them. As this is a proper car, the temperature gauges will move. When I was filming the car earlier, I had it sat still, warming through for a little bit, and the temperature gauges will go high. Then, when you're doing what I'm doing now, driving gently with a bit of wind moving over the car, they will go down. This is normal. I expect modern people will be all panicked and worried about this. I'm not. There's other bonus things too, like the fact that there's nearly no buffeting from the wind in here. In fact, that's why I'm doing this review with the window down. Now, would I prefer a car where the roof came off? Maybe. But as Mr. Metcalf will be quick to point out, the Barchetta really is a compromised car. This was built from the ground up as a coupe. The chassis construction is fairly basic by modern standards. It's a steel tubular construction with an aluminium body on top. But it's fine. I'm not worried about that. For the same money, I could have bought a McLaren. I could have, and I genuinely did consider that. But this is a car that I've wanted for so long, and it came up in my perfect spec at a price that I could actually afford, and I just thought I would be a fool to turn it down. I love the steering wheel. I love the pedals, even though they do need a little bit of adjustment. The brake pedal isn't in quite the right place for easy heel and toe, even though you can do it. Now, Hill Engineering, who are a UK-based company, do make a little adapter which will raise the brake pedal up just a little bit and solve that problem. So I'm probably going to get one of those soon. I've also got plenty of plans for things to do with this car and ways to make it just more sensible, more usable. Previous owners have had their own go at doing that. You've got a sat-nav stereo here, which I think is from an F430, or at least it's the same thing you'd find fitted to an F430. And tell me if you'd like to see me do a video using a 15-year-old text-based sat-nav to see if it actually still works. So I think that could be a fun video. Unfortunately, I can't use the stereo at all at the moment because the car's battery died after sitting for only about 5 days, so that's certainly going to need investigating. Now, at this point in time, I also need to thank Rata Rossa, Scott. Now, because of him, I was inspired to get this car. You see, a few years ago, I could have maybe afforded to buy my first Ferrari, but I was put off. I'll be totally honest, I was put off by the potential running costs and the ruinous maintenance of the car. The 550 is actually not that bad, and in many ways it's an easier car to maintain than something like the 355 or even possibly a 360. And Scott's shown me that there are many ways around problems that don't involve having to remortgage your house, and that's very handy because I don't own a house. I do own a Ferrari though. Priorities. Hashtag YOLO. Seriously though, I'm going to try and enjoy this car the best way that I can, which means using it on days like today, using it on days when I'm really going to enjoy it and going to appreciate it. And that's what this is really all about. It's that fantastic blend of car that if I want to, I can hammer it down the lane and have a lot of fun. But I can also sit here, go on my son, at 45, 50 mile an hour, just absolutely loving life. And I really, really am loving life right about now. I'm a very, very happy character. What else can I say about the 550? Well, in this video, which I guess is a first drive as much as a review, not an awful lot. There's a lot to be said about the car, and because there's so many different topics that need covering, I think the 550 has been criminally underserved by YouTube. I'm going to be dividing those up into separate topics to make them easier to find for future reference. But for now though, I want to say, as always, thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.